Well, welcome to another episode of Leaving a Rich Legacy. I am your host, Jessica Rich, and I am super excited to have our guest, Brandon, here today to talk about some topics that are so important in the Black and Brown community. As you all know, this podcast really is a love letter to my younger self, helping me shed light on various topics that we don't often discuss in the Black and Brown community. And when I think about legacy and what that means beyond financially, it really starts at home with the next generation and the next generation and the opportunity for us to create new patterns. So, Brandon, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yes, it is a pleasure. I'm happy to be here. So thank you for having me.
So let's start off and you just get us acquainted to who you are. So who is Brandon? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
That's a great question. And I think about that, when I hear that question, and I guess my default is to go to the talking about the roles that I occupy, right? As a husband, a father, a son, a professional. Um, so I'm all of those things. I'm that's a part of who I am. But I'm also somebody who believes in authenticity and somebody who's on his own journey to kind of find his own authenticity and to project that out into the world. So I'm a lover, I'm a fighter, I'm an encourager. I like to think of myself as kind of an activist or activator of change when it comes to the topic at hand. So yeah, I guess I'm a diverse mix of all those things.
Okay. Well, I love to hear I'm sure they're tired of hearing me say this, but I love when people can define who they are outside of like the roles, right?
Yes,
And the many hats that you wear. So love that you are self-aware enough to be able to talk about who you are outside of those things are important, right? But
absolutely.
you're still Brandon and there's other things to you. So thank you for sharing. So you are a certified life coach. And in your practice, you focus on men, but what inspired you exactly to become a coach?
So the thing that pushed me was trying to it was born out of necessity in some ways and kind of born out of my own journey. To give you some background, I've spent the better part of probably 20 something years trying to figure out what my passion was. And I've worked in a number of different industries and I've had different pursuits and all these things. And over the last probably 10 years, I've made some great money doing the work that I've been doing, but it just wasn't something that activated me. It didn't tap into my passion. I wasn't excited about doing it. Um, I wanted to find something to where my Mondays didn't feel like Mondays, if that makes sense. And I think for a lot of people, you kind of get for those of us who were working in a space that didn't activate that passion, about this time on Sundays, you kind of get the Sunday blues, right? It sets in and you're thinking, oh man, my weekend is gone. And so I wanted to get away from that, but I couldn't figure out, what was for me. And I started my own journey with kind of investigating my own mental health. I had some questions that I wanted to ask about myself, some philosophical questions, who I am, what's important to me, what do I value, why am I wired the way I am? And so I started working with a mental health professional. And over the past 2 years, I just had this like complete 180 change in myself that I found. Was I identified that my confidence was low, which was something that I was not aware of. But I could definitely see a night and day switch when I recognized that and began to move actively towards developing my own self confidence. And after I started doing that, things began to change in my life. I started to move differently. I started to feel differently. I felt more empowered. I felt more in control. I felt less like life was happening to me. Um, and when I thought about that, I was like, man, this is great. I'm sure there are other men that are like me that would love to feel this way. And then it's just the light bulb went off. That's it. Like, this is something you're passionate about pursuing in yourself. I've always loved to help people, but I couldn't really figure out how to monetize that, honestly. And when those two things intersected, the passion, the interest, the talent, um, it just created this opportunity for me that I saw as kind of untapped territory. And the more I looked into it, the more it kind of spiraled, and wanting to go from coaching into being a licensed counselor, and finding that there are so few Black men in that space, and the data I was looking at telling me that people are more likely to seek out a medical provider that they relate to, ergo that looks like them. Um, and I thought about that, and I'm saying, man, I'm seeing these other Black men, and I know that they exist because I exist. I feel these things. I feel the insecurities. I feel the imposter syndrome. I feel the confusion and the lack of direction and the lack of clarity. And man, I wish there was somebody who could speak to my experience, and somebody that's not on any extreme, one extreme or the other. Just somebody that's talking to like the average, regular, typical Black man that's trying to navigate all these expectations and all these roles. And so it was really just born kind of out of the convergence of those two streams into the same point, and here I am.
So your own personal journey experience led you here. Um, and I know that you focus specifically on men, right? Why men? Why men only?
Yeah, that's a fair question. And when I first started out, I was thinking cast a wide net, wide limited to anybody. But the more I read, just in researching and learning, because I don't have a background prior to, I guess, the last year or so in looking into these sorts of matters, from a professional sense. And the more I looked into it, the more feedback and information I got that says specializing is the way to go, because that helps you to focus when you're trying to build a practice. And, I thought about my journey as a Black man, and I thought about what I'm best equipped to speak to. And when I think about the roles that I occupy, I can't speak to what it is to be a woman. I can't speak to why it's important for a woman to, move in a certain way or understand the world or see it a certain way or to relate. It's impossible for me to not inject my experience as a man into trying to communicate with a woman. So, as a man, even as a Black man, there are privileges that I enjoy that a woman doesn't enjoy. I can go out to the store and not really be worried about somebody assaulting me or anything like that. I can move in a professional sense and not have to really worry about the ramifications of sexual harassment or things like that. And so the more I thought about it, it just seemed to make sense for me to focus on men. And then because of those roles, husband and father and all those things, again, it just felt natural for me. And then there's the idea of um, and I have to be honest, I'm not super like limited when it comes to gender roles. I'll say that, but what I will say is that um as I've understood it in my view of the world, my job as a man in my home is to protect my home and to protect my family and to do all these things. And so I feel like, as the one who sets the tone for those things, that there are probably other men out there who feel that same responsibility. And so wanting to speak to those men who are in the leadership position, for lack of a better term, in their home, um, it's important because they'll be setting the tones in their space too. And so if we're setting the tone in an unhealthy way, then that's going to be passed and transmitted into our wives and partners, and that's going to be transferred to our children in the form of unhealthy uh, practices and directions, and they're living our trauma vicariously because we're not focused and we don't have kind of those guardrails or the counsel, if you will. And so that really was, I think, my motivation for thinking about it like that.
So you spoke on quite a few things that really led you to the connection, and I get it, right? You want to make sure you want to help everyone, but it just does not work out that way.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a need for you in the space when it comes to men. So I definitely get it. I wanted to ask you though, because a lot of men that I reach out to, they are trying to find resources, but we have people like you who are there and available. But you talked about setting the tone for like your household and if you're in a leadership role. And I know today I wanted to ask you questions specifically about really healthy parenting and breaking generational patterns because you also connect with fathers in your services that you provide. So, what is healthy parenting to you?
Um, Great question. I think that healthy parenting is, I think it's being transparent. And in the early stages of my parenting journey, actually my oldest son just turned 18 2 days ago. So in the early stages, I was like trying to project this persona even to my own sons, like that I had it together and I didn't make mistakes and I didn't fail because I just felt like that was a responsibility of a father um to move in a way that seemed perfect, honestly. And I quickly found that that was fake. And that it wasn't realistic. It was impossible to do. So I think transparency is important, just so they know that there's not like this unattainable level of fatherhood that they will never achieve. Because if I'm projecting this unflappable perfect man that doesn't have any insecurities or inferiority complex, and they begin to live their journey and they're like, well, I have all those things, my father never had those things, so I don't measure up as a man. So I think starting from a place of transparency, and then giving our children a space to explore and learn and be themselves, and to not have to be subject to the limitations that we put on them, um, I think is really important as well. And it allows them to make mistakes. It allows them to build their own confidence. It gives them the opportunity to kind of shape the world in a way that they want it to be, from their worldview. And then I think modeling healthy behaviors, and I think something as simple as diet, right? What we put into our bodies and what we eat. And, these are things that we haven't, I don't think traditionally have really been taught, at least not in my experience. We don't really think about, like, am I teaching my sons to take care of their bodies? Am I teaching my sons to take care of their mind? And the focus is usually on finances, if that, or the focus is on education, if that, but it doesn't kind of branch out beyond those things. So I think providing, modeling those things, you talk it, but you walk it as well, would describe healthy parenting.
Okay. So, I love that you talked about modeling it and then creating a space for children to be themselves. When I think about the generation before us,
Yeah.
I'm sure that didn't exist at the time.
Right.
So for the parents who are kind of struggling with trying to give their kids that opportunity to be themselves and create a space where they can be open, what advice would you give them?
Um, I would tell them to I would tell them to give themselves space to recognize that their children are not them. Um, their children are their own person, right? And that may seem obvious, but I think if to anybody that's been a parent and had that light bulb to go off, to recognize, my children aren't an accessory to my life. My children are their own person as much as I'm my own person. And I think that does two things. That keeps the parent from putting so much pressure on this kid to behave in a way that may not be natural to them because they're not the same person as their parent. But I also think it takes the pressure off the parent because you're not hyper focused on trying to fit your child, who may be a round peg into a square hole, and try to force them into, a position that's not natural to them. So I would definitely start there. Um, I would encourage them um, to know that it's really hard to break a kid. So I found I've made a lot of mistakes as a parent, but fortunately, I found that mistakes are okay. And again, that goes back to my first point about the transparency and, being willing to love and lead your kids, but recognize you're going to make a mistake and then acknowledging those mistakes. And my sons will hopefully would tell you that, I've apologized. There have been times where I've overreacted to something or I underreacted to something. And I have to come back and say, you know what, man, I messed up on that. I didn't do my part. And I think that um, builds rapport with my sons, and I think that humanizes me to my sons, so they know, if I mess up, I can go to my dad, and he's not gonna flip out because clearly he makes mistakes too, and he acknowledges his mistakes.
Kudos to you for apologizing. I know a lot of us, or just in general, a lot of people have not experienced that from
Yeah.
their parents. But I think that has a long lasting effect where you can, when you're vulnerable, but then most importantly, you can apologize when you make mistakes.
Yeah.
So love that you are doing that and creating that space for your children. So thinking about some of the things that you shared, even thinking about, what parents can do to create this space. One thing that's very important to me is legacy. And I think us looking at parenting now versus parenting, where our parents raised us or the grandparents that raised them, it looks different, but there have been some generational patterns that have been passed down as well. So, how can prior generation parenting affect parents now? When you think of their parents and the things they may have done, how can that show up in the parent-child relationship today?
Yeah, I think a lot about this in my personal journey as a son, and kind of reflecting on things in hindsight and the experience I had and the things that now as a man, as I'm putting my life together, wishing that I had or wishing I didn't had. And I think it can be kind of tricky because previous generations, with the best of intentions, can kind of project limitations onto their children. And what I mean by that is, as a father, if I had some things that didn't pan out, if I had some failed endeavors, I can allow that to become um, law for me. And then if I see my own sons trying to follow similar pursuits, then maybe I can project those things onto them. Well, son, you that's not going to work out. You don't want to do that because you're going to fail. Um, and I've set it up in a way, my wife and I have set it up in a way that our sons ask questions and they push back on things and they say things like, well, how do you know it's going to fail? Well, it failed for me. Well, just because it failed for you doesn't mean it's going to fail for me, right? And I have to own that. And so I think getting away from those limitations can be challenging, and fighting those things off, as a son who has frankly had some limitations placed on him um, by my parents, and knowing that they had the best of intentions in most cases, but that can be smothering, and that can be dream killing, um, and that can prevent kids from even taking risk. And the beautiful thing about children is, in most cases, is they come out totally confident. There's not much that they think they can't do. Oh, Dad, I can jump off the second story of the house and I'll be fine, right? But I've lived and I've fallen and I've made mistakes, and I'm like, no, son, don't take that risk. But I don't know if my son can fly, or I don't know if he knows something I don't. And obviously, I'm speaking figuratively. I know my son can't fly, but just understanding that those limitations, and then also, um, the fear that it projects onto our children, um, either the fear of repeating the same mistakes that their parents made. You know, my father was absentee, or my father was abusive, or my father was this, my father was an alcoholic, so that means that's what I'm going to be. Or on the other side of the coin, like I said earlier, you know, my father was this man that never made mistakes. He was always prepared. He was never afraid. He never failed. And I don't feel like I'm capable of that. So in both cases, they end up maybe paralyzed by that fear of even um, living up to the expectations that their parents set, um, or not living up to those expectations.
So you touched on like experiences with our parents
Yeah,
and your parents, you know they did the best that they could,
right.
right? But sometimes when it comes to doing the best that our parents could at the time doesn't necessarily take away from the experiences that we had as children, because it could be completely different from what they think it is.
Yeah.
And because of that, there are a lot of adults hurt from just things they experienced as children and don't have the best relationships with their parents. So why do you think it's so important to heal from the lack of relationship with our parents or the experiences that we had as children?
Yeah, and I read a book um recently, but probably within the last year. I think I have it here actually. And I'll show it. Pardon my French, but the subtle art of not giving a fuck is in that book. I learned that there's some things that happen to us in life that may not be our fault. You know, there's trauma we may experience as children that may not be our fault, but it is our responsibility that once we know better, or we have the capacity to correct some things, that we try to do so. And I think there is a shared responsibility in all relationships, and specifically in a relationship with the child and their parent, an adult child and their parent, I'll say, to share the responsibility to try to heal that relationship. Um, I also think that giving grace is important because it frees us from the weight of any grudges we may be holding, any residual negative feeling from the past, like that we may hold on to, and within reason, depending on the severity of the situation, that may be easier than other times. But I think giving grace is important because it frees us from that weight, and we don't have to carry that around anymore. And then it gives us a perspective on the dynamic of that child parent relationship and how it is a two-way street. And then when we start having kids, and it gives us some insight, and we think back onto like, oh man, I remember this happened when I was a kid and my mom or my dad reacted this way. And I'm a parent now and I'm reacting the same way. And you think about your own motivation as a parent or why you're doing what you do, and then that gives you perspective on, oh, well, maybe my dad wasn't just being mean to me. Maybe he just had my best interest in mind. So I think it kind of bridges that gap of understanding, um, once we get to a point. So like healing those relationships, I think gives us all those things. It gives us freedom from that weight. It gives us perspective, and it gives us an opportunity to address things that we are on the hook for trying to correct, whether it's our fault it happened or not.
How do you think when unhealed
Mhm.
trauma or just being unhealed from the relationships with our parents, how
Yeah.
can that show up with a partner? So
Oh
whether it's
man.
your spouse or partner, how can that show up in that relationship?
Yeah. I think that it can show up in ways that causes us to put expectations on our partner, um, that it puts us in a position to where we put responsibility on our partner to fix things that they're not responsible for fixing. Um, and one thing I'm learning is that I don't believe any person is responsible for what another person does with their feelings. And so if I have some unresolved trauma from my childhood, it's not my wife's responsibility to fix that. It's not her responsibility to fill that hole, and I know we hear people talk about, be his peace, right? Be his peace. But if there's some stuff that I haven't fixed and rectified in my past, then she can try as much as she wants to be my peace, but she can't give me peace. She can enhance my peace. Um, she can help to set the environment for, peace to permeate the environment, but she cannot give me peace. That's my responsibility. And I think if we have those unresolved issues and then we take them into a relationship and it's like, hey, I'm broken. I need you to fix this because I have this expectation that you complete me. Then what's going to happen is there's going to be unmet expectations on my side. So I'm going to have disappointment, which I'm going to project to her. She'll have unmet expectations because she's like, man, I didn't expect to be responsible for all these other things. And I'm trying my best and I'm trying to be supportive and I'm trying to do all these things. And now maybe she has some resentment or worse, she feels inadequacy because I've put weight that doesn't belong to her on her. Um, and then if you have children in the midst of that, they see the conflict and the friction and they learn, oh, I'm responsible for my loved one's hurts. And then you may end up with children who were like me, who felt responsible for managing the feelings and the emotions and the mood of adults, even as a child.
So thinking about everything you said
Yeah.
and how, your partner is not responsible specifically for being your peace, but, helping increase it,
Yeah.
or just in general, is not responsible for healing
Mm-hmm.
you or anyone, whatever relationship that is.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's important for men in the Black and Brown community to seek resources for healing, whether that's their parent and child relationship, and also for to be a better father?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the idea of what I'm responsible for. Um, so if I develop a physical ailment, I get a cough or I develop a sickness, I break a bone, you know, and I know that there are resources to treat that. I know the doctor's office exists. I know that there are, surgeons who can address things, but I'm not going to do anything about that. Most people would look at me crazy, right? If they see me with the noticeable limp, my leg is broken. I'm trying to get around. They see the pain showing up on my face, right? I'm limited. And most people are going to be like, man, you should do something about that. There are people that can help with that. Well, the same thing applies to matters of the head and matters of the heart. Is we have a responsibility to address those things. Um, I mean, even for our own benefit, but it also benefits our children and our children's children because we're not then um, remanufacturing and passing on that same trauma to our children, and it gives us an opportunity to break a cycle because just like I may have learned some unhealthy tendencies and habits from my predecessors, then I just keep passing it down the line until somebody says, you know what, I've had enough of this. It's gonna stop with me. Um, and that takes a lot of maturity as a parent. That takes a lot of getting out of the mindset of, well, my father wasn't there, so I don't know what to do. So therefore, I'm kind of not responsible for how I father my kids. And I call BS on that.
Mm.
Because if we can create this child, then we got to be willing to do the work to heal and address those things. Again, wasn't my fault what happened to me as a kid, but it's my responsibility because I know better now that I have to do better. And that's what, um, to go back to one of your original questions, healthy parenting, that's what that looks like is asking those tough questions of ourselves. Like, man, am I really doing everything that I can to give my my kids the best version of me that they deserve.
So when you think about, what you shared and talking about the responsibility as, a parent and not being able to control what happened to you, there may still be some men who are struggling just with that childhood trauma and they're trying to navigate through fatherhood and they want to be, right, a good father. They want to do better and break that generational pattern, but maybe they're just struggling. Do you have any encouraging words for them?
I would let them know if nobody has told them that, and I keep saying this, but I think this is a recurring theme that what happened to you as a kid isn't your fault. Um, I will start there. Um, and we think back when we think back over things that happened to us as a kid, and we think like, man, I should have done this in that situation. I should have done that. But we're looking at it with the mind and the capacity of an adult. So if I was, I was at times bullied as a child. And if I think back to those incidents and think like, man, if I was in that situation, I would do this, but I wasn't 6'2" and 220 pounds then. So there was nothing I could do. I was a child. Um, so I would start there. What happened to you isn't your fault. As a kid. Um, you're not your parents. You're not doomed to create or to repeat their mistakes. Just because they did it, and just because there are things that are passed to you, you may look like them, you may talk like them, you may even reason like them at times. But um, your story is not written in stone just because of how your parents operated. Um, and I would also say to them, um, I would tell them that they have the power to um, they have the power to shape their relationship with their children however they want it to be. They don't have to acquiesce to anybody's outward expectations. And the health and effectiveness of their parenting is up to them and their children to decide. And so we can have all these other expectations of how you should parent. People will tell you, or you should parent your kids like this. You should spank them. You shouldn't spank them. You should, like, all these things. But you get to decide how you want your relationship with your children to go. Um, Regardless of what has happened to you in the past, regardless of what your perception of parenthood has been, you can change your mind. You get to change your mind. You're not locked into anything.
I think that last part was powerful. Just a reminder, like you have the power to
Yeah.
change.
Right.
You don't have to repeat those experiences.
Yeah.
You get to decide. And I think maybe just sometimes we forget, like
We
we have
do.
the power to create the new patterns for generations to come. But
Yeah.
most importantly, that immediate relationship as a parent and with the child. So when you think of that, why is it so important to have a healthy relationship with children? What's the long-term effect of having that healthy,
Uh-huh.
child and parent?
Yeah. I think that healthy relationship is important for our children because at the end of the day, we are all looking for um safety, and we're looking for security, and we are looking to be enough. And I think that, developing those healthy relationships will benefit our kids because we set the foundation for their outlook of themselves. And I know that I've said before that self-worth is how we view ourselves independent of other people's expectations and what we do. But the truth is, typically the first kind of kernel of self-worth is planted by our parents. Um, and they kind of put that seed in there, and then they help to nurture the conditions to where that self-worth begins to take root, and it blossoms and it grows into self-confidence. And so them having that healthy dynamic with the parent, I think, accelerates that process, and which in turn gives them a sense of security. Right, I'm not concerned that my parent won't show up physically or emotionally or however, if I have that relationship. And that helps me to form healthy attachment styles. So I'm not anxious, or I'm not avoidant. I don't feel like I need to compensate for anything, or I don't feel like I need to protect myself by putting walls up because my parent has let me down so many times. And again, it doesn't mean the parent is perfect, but it does mean more times than not they're present and they're engaged and they're doing their best, and they're supportive and doing the work of being the parent every day. um I think it gives the child that, and then children grow into adults, and hopefully those things take root, and it grows a healthy, thriving person who, once they have children, can repeat that process. So I think it goes just beyond the immediate needs of nurturing small children, because I truly believe it sets that foundation for the type of adult that person will become.
So you hit on self-worth, which is an important topic to me,
Yeah,
in the fact that parents plant that initial seed when it comes to children. And I've heard many times that we'll never have a conversation more than anyone else other than ourselves because of the conversations we have in our mind.
right.
And recently it was shared with me that a lot of times that conversation stems from someone in your life that planted the seed. So, how are you focusing on like building up your children,
Mm.
and planting that seed so they know their worth?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's actually one thing I left out when you asked earlier about why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. Because I was focused on myself when I gave those answers, but the truth of the matter, what really spurred me to make the changes that I wanted to make in my life, is my sons, because I want to give them the best version of me. And I do want to leave them with, like, that's the real legacy. Um, that's the legacy nobody can take from them. I can give them businesses and land and money, um, but like the love and support that I plant in them, and that self-worth that I plant in them, those are things that will become inherent to who they are, that people can't take away from them. And because I know that, and because I'm hyper aware of how external forces will try to shape them if I don't shape them, like nothing happens by accident. So if I'm not there, if I'm not present to engage my sons intentionally, to impart on them the lessons that I've learned, to give them the space to grow and become who they are, then there's going to be people that don't love them that will try to tell them who they are. Some of them will have good intentions, some of them will not, but I don't want to take that chance. And so I think the best thing that I can do for my sons is to give them me, and to give them these lessons about developing, and pursuing and knowing and nurturing and loving who they are, because that's something that that wasn't like intentionally put in me as a child. The idea of being confident in who you are. You are beautiful. You are smart. You are intelligent. You have the capacity to do difficult things. Those things were just, I just had to kind of learn those by accident. And I don't want to roll the dice on that. So my sons know, and they sometimes get irritated when I tell them, hey man, what people gonna tell you, every day of the week. You're too tall, you're too short, you're too black, you're not black enough, you're too light, you're too dark, your hair's too long, your hair's too short, it's too curly, it's too. You got to know who you are without question, because people are going to push you and push the boundaries with you. So I want to make sure that they are equipped with that knowledge of who they are, what their worth is before anything else. And I believe if they're equipped with those things, everything else is going to fall in line, because they're not going to settle for just any old thing from any old body.
That's so good and powerful,
I
and
get
I think our
passionate
young men
about that.
need
I'm
that.
sorry. I just I like that. That is man, yeah. That's the thing. That yeah. I'm sorry. I just I just get activated.
No, I love it because I know men are not my ministry, but I want our men to do well, especially in our
Mhm.
community. I just know that that's not my purpose.
I'm
So
telling
it's always refreshing to hear people like you know, really, like you said, you like it activated something because you know it starts at home and
you.
the
Right.
impact it can have just by you starting at home and think about their peers by you planting those seeds, how it could affect them. And it's so important for our community. So I think that is so important for other fathers to hear that like or mothers,
Yeah.
but it starts with you. You help plant that seed and instill that confidence and the values in your children at a young age. And
Yeah.
you can't take your traumatic experiences and dump it on them. You got to be willing to change the pattern. So very great response. I'm glad I thought to add it to actually ask you once you started talking about self-worth. So well, Brandon, this is my favorite question of the podcast because I do believe the relationship with our younger self is so important.
Mhm.
So, if you could have a conversation with younger Brandon, what
Yeah.
would you tell him?
The first thing I would tell them, and I've given this a lot of thought, is you are enough, and don't be afraid to be yourself. And rejection, the fear of rejection, I think, is ever present for most people, whether from childhood all the way up through adulthood. And so I will start with that. You are enough. Let's get that understood. Um, I would also say not to let other people's expectations limit you. Because again, you know, things didn't work out for somebody in some way. So automatically they're as far as they're concerned, it's not gonna work out for you. And know that there are things inside you, there are talents and gifts and the capacity to do things that for whatever reason that other person may not have had. And so don't let those expectations limit your growth. Um, you're not responsible for for those feelings. Managing other people's expectations and outcomes and their feelings, that's not your job. That's not your job. And that was a thing that I had. I'm a recovering people pleaser. I'll say it like that. um Feeling like in every relationship I had, even as a child, that it was my responsibility to make sure that person was always good and always comfortable and always happy. And that's well-meaning. And that's no, and I think in our society, we typically praise people that move like that. And that's because they make life easier for the rest of us. But what is not understood about that is there is a cost, and nobody has an endless capacity to just give and support and pour into other people if nothing is going back into your cup. And so I would definitely tell myself that you're not responsible for trying to hit this moving target of keeping other people happy, because that's subject to how they're feeling that day. They may have woke up on the wrong side of the bed or had a fight with the spouse or a parent or a teacher or whoever. It's not your job to manage that. So you got to control what you can control. Um, be at peace with that. And lastly, I would say um, that it's not selfish to love yourself. It's not selfish to consider yourself. It's not selfish to put yourself first at times. And again, we have well-meaning advice in our society. Think about others and consider, and that's good. It's, it's good to be helpful to other people and to consider other people, but that can't be our default setting, because what happens is if I'm constantly in a place of putting other people's first, the things that I need don't go away. So if I'm not meeting my own needs and other people aren't meeting my needs, then that means that my needs go unmet, and there's a cost associated with that. So just like it's not my job to manage other people's stuff, it ain't their job to manage mine. So what does that mean? That means that I have to at some point put myself first and say, okay, I love you, but you're gonna have to give me some time and space, because it's some stuff I gotta check and deal with and reinvest into myself.
Taking care of yourself, putting yourself first, choosing yourself, starting
Yeah,
at a young age.
yeah, have to, have to. That goes back to that legacy of like um even communicating that to my sons, like, son, it's not your job to make sure dad is straight. It's not your job to make sure I'm doing the work I need in my head and in my heart, or in any arena in my life. It's not your job to manage that. That's my job. So I want to free them from that, from putting that expectation on themselves. Um, I didn't have children so they could take care of me. That ain't their job. So yeah, they're gonna know that, and it's gonna come back to bite me at some point, because I'm gonna ask them to do something and they're gonna tell me it's not their job or whatever. That's how it goes.
Well, you're right. It'll come back around, right?
Yeah,
Kids love to remind
absolutely.
you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Brandon, one, thank you for being here today, sharing your wisdom and insight and what you're doing with your community and trying to really help others create a legacy, and become a better parent, right? Focusing on, fatherhood and just healthy parenting, which I think is so important. Is
Sure.
there anything that you would like to share with us that you didn't get an opportunity to share?
I would just encourage any of your viewers and listeners that if you know of any men in your life, or if you are a man who is trying to figure out your own path, and you're looking for somebody to partner with you as a guide, I would be happy to work with you. I can be found on socials at Mind and Body Coaching across all platforms. Well, not TikTok. I don't have TikTok. I think that's about to go away anyway, but Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'd be happy to work with you. I would love the opportunity to talk with you, because I do feel extremely passionate about this work. And I think that the first step is difficult, but I think once you take that first step, that you'll be happy. And so if you are looking for an opportunity to partner with somebody that's more than likely been where you are, I would love the chance to work with you. So other than that, Jessica, I really appreciate you, and the platform and what you're doing with it, and having conversations like these and being intentional about that. I'm definitely grateful for you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And again, appreciate you being here. I will drop all of your information in the caption so they can connect with you. And I just highly encourage you all, if you know a man that might benefit from this podcast, share it.
Yeah.
But then also share Brandon's information, as he has shown that he is passionate about the work and really trying to help make a difference and walk along that journey with other men. So I appreciate you, Brandon. Look forward to connecting with you in the future. And I hope you have a good day.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks.